Hello everyone and welcome back to Crusader Kings 3, Dev Diary number 3. Today we are going to be talking about warfare. Greetings! War. What is it good for, you may ask? A whole lot, I'd say. You can use it to press that juicy claim you have been holding on to for a while, or perhaps you'd rather use it to put the unbelievers to the sword. I like where this is going. Whichever strikes your fancy, the topic of the day is war, and more specifically, how we can go about waging war. I have no idea if it picked up on the microphone, but my cat is cooing at me from the base of my chair because he wants his dinner. I aim to give you an overview of how wars will be fought. I will not go into details about CBs or anything like that this time. Bear in mind that the game is still very much in development, and everything talked about here is subject to change. Let's start by taking a look at what an army is made up of. Just like in Crusader Kings 2, the bulk of your armies consists of levies. Levies in Crusader Kings 3 are made up their own unit type, simply called a levy. These are essentially conscripted peasants forced to do your bidding and are not very important or impressive on their own. In great numbers, however, they are an efficient meat shield meant to complement the troops of your army that have a far higher impact than men-at-arms. Men-at-arms are the equivalent to the retinues in CK2. They are trained troops that come in several different unit types which excel in their given role. There are base variations available for everyone to recruit, such as light cav and heavy infantry, but the really impressive ones are usually unique to certain cultures or specific regions of the map, though all have their own stats and uses. Speaking of stats, there are 4 different values present on a men-at-arms regiment that you need to keep track of. Damage. This is obviously the amount of damage a single soldier of this type is able to inflict on the opponent. Toughness. This is how much damage the soldier can take. Pursuit. In the aftermath of a battle, more on this below, pursuit increases the amount of damage you can inflict upon a routing enemy. And screen, the opposite of pursuit, screen allows you to protect fleeing soldiers from being killed. Not all men-at-arms are equal. You'll have access to a few immediately from the start and unlock access to additional regiment types as you progress through the game. Some will be similar to each other, but may be tailored towards a certain train type. Others may just be a straightforward upgrade, but will in those cases be much more expensive than their weaker counterparts. Men-at-arms allow you to customize your army for any given situation. If you know where and who you will fight, certain men-at-arms will be far superior. Is there a lot of hilly terrain in your region? Then archers are the way to go. Are you facing a lot of cav? Bring pikemen. A smaller army will stand a much higher chance of winning if you bring men-at-arm types that counter those of your enemy. When a regiment is countered, its efficiency in battle will be lowered, with its damage output significantly reduced. If the countered regiment is greatly outnumbered by the countering type, efficiency reduction will be even further. There's a limit to how much a men-at-arms damage can be reduced, though, as to not make your expensive troops completely useless. Next, we have a special kind of men-at-arms, siege weapons. I'm so happy to see this in the game. Medieval warfare was all about the sieges. Castles and sieges are very iconic for the time frame, so we felt that it was necessary to have them properly represented. You'll start off with access to rather weak catapults, but it will still allow you to siege holdings faster than without one. Later on, you'll unlock improved siege weapons, such as trebuchets, that are able to speed up sieges significantly. And in our beautiful little picture we have here, you've got a tiny little baby catapult, a big boy catapult, a proper trebuchet, and some sort of siege gun, which I love the looks of. You can only own a certain number of men-at-arms regiments at any time, so choose carefully which troops you decide to recruit. That seems very similar to the retinue cap in CK2. Levies and men-at-arms are not the only soldiers available to you. As a ruler, you have a number of knights at your disposal. These are the vassals and courtiers of your realm with a high prowess, which is the equivalent of combat rating in CK2, and represents how good a character is at fighting and is used when they participate in battle. You can normally only have a few dedicated knights, but there are various ways to increase your number of knights as well as their effectiveness. And what I'm liking here, and I discussed this with Midgeman in the second part of this video, is it definitely looks like you can force people to be a combat knight there. I see the word force, and I'm liking that from the other side, though. As a vassal, maybe you can be forced and have the option to say no. Who knows? We will see. Finally, we have the commander. An army can only have a single commander who uses his martial skill to improve the troops under their command. There are plenty of different commander traits available, which either have a direct effect on battle, such as train bonuses, or give the commander bonuses outside of battle. One such example is the ability to have the supply last longer. More on that below. We have supplies now. With armies out of the way, let's have a look at battles. At the very start of any battle, a combat width is set that decides how many troops are able to fight each other at the same time. The width is set to the relative size of the defender, depending on the terrain type you're fighting in, being larger in flat open terrain and smaller in rough and mountainous terrain. I would generally advise against attacking larger armies in plains, for example. That's similar to all Paradox games right now. If you have a smaller army, trying to fight somewhere where there is less combat width is always beneficial. The single most important part of any battle is advantage. Now this is new, which is essentially a modifier that increases the damage of all troops on either side. When a battle starts, all sources of advantage is taken into consideration. It can come from traits, terrain, buildings, or other items. But most importantly, the martial skill of your commander. All of these are added together for both sides of the battle. The difference is then added as the advantage bonus for the side with the higher advantage. Now that might sound a little complicated, but once you break it down, it's really quite simple. For an example, your army has a total advantage of 40 and attacks an enemy that has a lousy total of 10. This means that you have an advantage of 30 during the battle, which then translate into significantly higher damage bonus for your troops. In addition to the starting advantage, each commander also takes a roll every few days in an attempt to increase their advantage or even it out. There's our RNG. This tug of war can be further expanded by various modifiers and traits. For example, the trait Cautious Leader will decrease your potential max roll, but also increases your lowest possible roll, trading a high potential for a higher average. These exist to make even battles a little more unpredictable, but will rarely be the deciding factor. Soldiers on the combat line damage the enemy on every tick. When a soldier dies, he will be considered to either be a casualty or be routed. Casualties, you guessed it, are considered dead and will have to be replenished over time. Routed soldiers, on the other hand, are troops that are injured or fled the battle and added back to the army once the battle is resolved. Battles are resolved once either side runs out of fighting troops. Once the battle is won, it enters the aftermath phase, which lasts for a few days. This is when the victor has the opportunity to chase down and kill any survivors, aka the routed troops. As mentioned earlier, this is the time for certain men-at-arms to shine. With a high pursuit, you can kill a larger amount of enemy to really capitalize on your victory. Alternatively, you can have a high amount of screens to make losing battles less penalizing. Keep in mind that battles will grant you a fairly limited amount of war score, which brings us to the sieges. Besieging and occupying enemy holdings is the main way of gaining war score and winning wars. As mentioned in last week's map Dev Diary, I'll put a link to that. I'll put a little link up in the corner right now if you've missed that one. Baronies are their own provinces. You will not have to siege all of them in order to occupy a full county to seize your war goal. Only fortified holdings need to be besieged. Castles and county capitals are all fortified by default, with how difficult it is to besiege these holdings being based on their fort level. Fort level can be increased by certain buildings and modifiers. Now, the fort level seems perfectly normal from CK2. But what it does suggest there is that, you can fortify up a province out the wazoo if you so choose. Each fort level increases the amount of siege progress you need to get before it gets occupied. You gain a base amount of siege progress every tick, which can be increased further by heavily outnumbering the garrison or having siege weapons. This constant progress won't change over the course of a siege. It allows you to know what the maximum duration of the siege will be, and you can take that into account as you plan your next move. Sieges also have what we call siege events, which will occur with a fixed interval and can make the siege progress faster by giving you a one-time siege progress bonus or increase your base siege progress. Siege weapons are required to get to the Breached Walls event, which in turn allows you to directly assault the holding. This is a risky maneuver since it will cost you troops at the benefit of vastly increasing your daily siege progress. Now that definitely seems like a combination of maybe Imperator and old CK2 add some EU4 items into that CK3 package for sieges. Being attacked while besieging a holding will make you the attacker in the battle. That is something I am so happy to see, making you lose out on any useful defender bonuses you will get from the terrain. Sieges are therefore slightly riskier. Assaulting the holding to gain control of it before the enemy attacks might be well worth the cost. So happy to see that, because that was never more of a source of contention with me for CK2, was the fact that someone sieging down your capital always got that defensive bonus if you put your capital in a mountain. Anywho, I digress. A few final words on moving armies around. As I mentioned briefly in last week's DD thread, major rivers have designated fords for crossing. You can no longer cross them freely as in CK2, and will often have to move your army to find a good place to cross. Beware though, crossing a major river will make you lose advantage should you engage an enemy in battle on the other side, making river crossings for perfect places to catch your opponent. Along with the increased amount of impassable terrain, there are plenty of bottlenecks that you can use to your advantage. Pun intended. Happy to see that as well. Have you ever been annoyed by walking into a province just for a short while in CK2, only to go above the supply limit and lose a bunch of troops? Fear not. Armies can now carry an amount of supply with them. Supply is drained whenever armies are in baronies with a lower supply limit than their size. You can therefore safely march through a few baronies with a low supply limit without troops dying. If your army runs out of supply, however, you will start to take attrition and lose troops over time. Supply is increased as long as you are below the supply limit in territory you control. Beware though, your army might not take attrition on low supply, but it would suffer an advantage penalty in battles. Chasing armies deep into enemy land is certainly not recommended. Marching into a county controlled by the enemy that doesn't border anything you control and is not on the coast will make your army take a single and significant attrition hit. If you have a huge amount of troops to spare, that is, then perhaps you don't need to worry about it. That's it for the raw information, everybody. Stick around, and me and Midgeman are going to discuss what all of this means. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Crusader Kings 3, Dev Diary number 3, where we're talking about war. I am joined by my friend and fellow content creator, Midgeman here, and we're just going to be having a little, I was going to say round table, but I mean, there's only two of us, so square table discussion about, and there's a cat in the background of mine already. Oh. right under Bender, there's a cat already. A little square table discussion about the Dev Diary here, because I've been making little videos about the Dev Diaries, because I know a lot of people want to know the information but don't want to spend the time to read them, and they'd rather just kind of get it in a podcast kind of format, and I know Midgeman was doing a similar thing as well. Yes. So let's just figure we just, this is what we do anyways. We both end up reading them and then spend an hour discussing about what we read while playing Apex or something like that.
Yeah, so we make our own videos and then go and discuss them together on a stream anyway, so it made a lot of sense, and so we hope you enjoy this format.
Is there anything that stuck out in particular for you? With the like one key just to start this out, is there anything that really stuck out?
Well, just to go over all of it in the sense of, I think a lot of it, the way it's being structured now, because just to make sure, this Dev Diary is on war, so it's a look into warfare for the first time, and this is stuff that even I haven't been told when I was at PDXCon. They kept it completely silent, pretty much for the entire time. I like how it's structured more historically accurate, if that makes sense. So
in a sense that not every single person who's fighting in an army is going to be a full knight in a suit of like plate or something like that, or a longbowman.
There's like now there's what it seems to have like almost 4 structures. So you have your commanders, you have knights, you have men-at-arms, and then you have levies. And then the levies are just the bulk of your army, but they're random peasants that are hired to do whatever you want. And then you've got the men-at-arms, which are like the retinues from CK2, which are more specialized troops.
I'm gonna put that up on my screen right now, where you can see a little army that's got a decent-sized army of 7,500 men, but 6,800 of them are peasant levies.
Yeah, I'll bring that up as well. And also, then they have knights as a section, which is like vassals within your court of good
have a
marshal.
decent marshal.
Yeah, you can actually bring them as knights, and then you have commanders. So that actually kind of fits more historically how armies were structured. So I quite like that as a concept of this sort of, a lot of people fighting in the medieval era didn't know how to fight and were just forced to do it by people
guys
rich
with
on
sticks.
horseback. Yeah.
What I pulled from it mostly is that I feel like they're definitely trying to get away from the current CK2 mindset that I would say that the majority of CK2 players has when it comes to war. The warfare in CK2 is very complex, but a lot of it is either meta information that is just kind of in the ether and hard to find unless you're digging in contextual menus, or just things you learn over time by like deep diving in for information about warfare in CK2. Most people seem to look at CK2 like, whoever got the larger army wins, unless they're horses. And that's kind of like how most people think of CK2. Oh, and that's a mountain. Don't attack into that. That's kind of the extent of it.
Never attack the Venetians in Italy because they've got pikes and they get hills bonus. Yeah, those.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's a lot more to it. A lot of people either don't bother, actually trying to focus on that information, like looking at commander traits. This commander has a lower martial, but it has narrow flank bonus, so I'm going to put this guy on a flank, and then I'm going to go to try to fight in a hill province to reduce the combat width, to try to really take advantage of that, so I can overcome the numbers. A lot of people don't really look at that kind of stuff when they're playing CK2. It's just, I got a big army, they got a small army, let's go win. Oh, I lost even though I had superior numbers. RNG was against me. That's kind of the extent of how CK2 is played a lot. It seems like in this, there's a lot more going on that you can either directly affect or can easily see to try to bring people into the warfare focus a little bit more.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I like that this whole... They've basically reworked how those modifiers work that we've been talking about very subtly with CK2. So, like, you've got a heavy infantry leader with low martial, but he's technically better than someone with higher martial just because of the stat bonuses. They've got that with a new system where it's... Hold on, let me find the name of the system. It's... the advantage system.
Oh, yeah. Where it basically takes all of those modifiers, adds them up, and see who's got a bigger number.
Yeah, but there's certain stats that, for example, will cut down your top end, but increase your low end. So, like, it's got like I think it was cautious was the trait. Yeah, it was the cautious leader trait. So
it brought in your on both the top and the bottom your potential for RNG. And I can imagine that there's a flip side of that, like the trickster trait maybe from CK2.
Yeah.
Or experimentality, I think it might be something. There's one of those combat traits where you could really either throw an army away with it or win a stunning victory.
Yeah,
I can imagine
trickster,
expanding it out, like give you a larger negative range but a higher positive range for the rolls, something like that.
Yeah. So it's basically showing how everything affects the dice rolls a lot more clearly, and there's also more things now that affect the dice rolls than the stats and the martial skill. So like
terrain, I think is going to be more important.
Terrain's going to be important. Your traits obviously will still affect it. For example, I'm going to pop this example up. I'm sure Ben will too. There's the example of the Holy Warrior trait, and it says that it adds 10 to advantage for this moment if they're
which seems like a lot, because in the example they gave us, they gave us one example of a advantage situation, and the total advantage was like one side had 10, one side had 40. So they could have just been pulling random numbers out of their butts for that, but I can imagine that they would have been using, whoever wrote this Dev Diary was using the information they had on the game already too. So that's probably like a normal range. We're looking at several tens or dozens of advantage like pips. So an advantage of 10 could be potentially pretty huge.
Yeah, well, the example they gave meant that the army with the advantage of 40 had a 30 advantage.
Mm-hmm.
So just to explain it, it's if you have an army with 40 advantage and they have an advantage of 10, their advantage gets taken away from yours, and then whatever's left is what you actually have as an advantage over them, which translates to the modifier that you get.
That actually reminds me of something that snuck in. I feel like it was snuck in really like under the radar in one of the later paragraphs there. The way I read it is that in EU4 if you are defending a castle, you always get the terrain bonus.
Yes.
CK2 it doesn't work like that. It's whoever gets there first.
Mm-hmm.
There's a paragraph at the bottom of this that says if you are besieging a city or any province and you are attacked from the outside, you are looked at as the attacker, meaning that whoever owns the province and the fort is the defender, which is a huge issue I always felt with CK2 because the game I'm playing right now, all my provinces save one are mountains.
Yeah.
But I'm constantly, but every time I'm attacked, the enemy goes straight for the capital, and I'm constantly having to attack into mountains, because it's hard to bait them in at times. And I really like that change.
That's also not going to be a thing as well. People aren't just going to be able to dive straight for your capital anymore because there's going to be forts, and those forts you have to siege them. The only provinces you have to siege are fortified provinces, but all castles and capitals are automatically fortified, so you have to siege them down. Like in CK2 where you'd siege multiple holdings on one tile, it's just kind of spread out a bit more. But it means that you can plan your defenses.
Actually, I have to move around a little bit to do it.
Plan your defenses around the terrain, the bottlenecks, the castles. If you're invading, you need to make sure that you're not leaving a castle behind you to, screw with your supply train and reinforcements coming in.
And that actually kind of ties in with the last Dev Diary where they were talking about terrain, because there are more terrain modifiers that matter more. And there is more impassable terrain areas leading to more choke points, and there are river crossings now. So for you to get across a river, you cannot just swim across the Meuse if you want, or ford the Rhine at 300 meters wide.
You have to go to bridges or fords.
Or actual fords. And I could definitely see people just being like, okay, that's the ford on a border. I'm just going to take that city there and build all of the walls on it.
Yeah. For example, to take a historical example of that, 1066 invasion of Britain, Battle of Stamford Bridge. It was on a bridge for a reason. They couldn't cross anywhere else. They had to meet them there. It was like Harold Hardrada's invasion would have changed completely if he could have just walked around the army. But no, he had to meet Godwinson where it was, and proved to be a bit of a failure for him. So the bridges, fords, they're going to be so much more, which is...
In theory, I love that idea, but I also love that idea when I read the exact same thing in the Imperator Dev Diaries, earlier in the year.
So I didn't read the Imperator Dev Diaries. This is my first foray into sort of Dev Diaries. It's kind of...
Because I read all of those, because, I'm a robotophile.
Yeah.
So I was reading all of that stuff, and that all this information is kind of the same information we had there, where, the map is more granular, there's more impassable terrain, you could do the choke points and fortify them. And in theory, that all sounds great. In Imperator, it didn't work like that at all. CK2, I have a little more faith in that.
CK3.
And your ability to to be able to actually fortify a choke point. And supply is definitely going to be a much more important thing. And attrition. I always thought there was never enough attrition in Paradox games. The ability to just walk massive armies around with next to no issues in EU4 and in CK2 I always thought was a little wonky. I thought attrition needed to be a lot higher.
CK2's attrition was really wonky in the fact that it was either none or everything. You could skip a province and then suddenly take... I'm currently taking 49% attrition while walking through this province, but I'll be fine when I get to the next place.
What always got me was, you could walk into a province and then look and be like, oh shit, I got a 20k stack and it's only a 7k supply limit here. All these men are gonna die. And then you look at the clock, or the clock in the corner, they're like, oh, but it's only January 2nd. I'll be able to get these guys out of this province in 3 weeks. I won't take an attrition tick. Or you look at it and go, fuck, it's January 29th. They're all going to die.
Yeah,
because the attrition is only ticked at the end of the month.
Walking through one province at the wrong time of the month, it's just like everybody's dead. Sorry,
everybody's dead, or it's posies as far as the eye can see.
It's just the Grim Reaper.
Apple orchards and pears.
The Grim Reaper is there with the rabbit from Alice in Wonderland, both looking at a clock like it's time.
It's the first of the month, fuckers.
Oh dear.
There's a lot of information about how attrition works in CK3, and it's way different than in CK2. In CK2, it's pretty static in terms of it's two numbers.
Yeah.
It's supply limit on the province, which is modified by some things, but it boils down to the supply limit on the province and the amount of troops that are in that province. If one number is higher than the other, then they take a percentage of attrition at the top of the month, and that is that. In this, it specifically made reference to supply wagons that you're bringing with you, which is what they just added into Imperator as well. Your army brings supplies with you. They will consume those supplies if you are over your the supply limit of the province you're in. If you're not, then they just keep them around. Makes perfect sense to me. And then there's also things like if you're basically not going to really have to worry about attrition too much if you're in a border province or a sea province, because you can theoretically easily bring in supplies that way. But if you just go ham and go straight for the enemy capital, like you do in CK2 right now, it's like, oh, I'm going to get 50% war score from taking down the capital barony. So I'm just going to march across the Arabian desert. I'm going to march all the way from the Caspian Sea to Egypt. No problem. I'll just split my army in two and they'll march in two lines. I'll get there, siege down his capital. All is fine. Not anymore.
Yeah.
You are going to die from attrition if you try that, which I like.
Yeah, and that just harps to actual medieval warfare. Rule 1 of medieval warfare, never leave a castle behind you. Like, you have to siege everything as you go, otherwise there is people that can raid and take your supply. It's like, you just don't do it. I like the fact that armies carry supply with them now as a thing. It's a statted thing that an army is carrying a certain amounts of supply, so you can plan your invasion such as so you can go, right, I've got enough supply for 4 months and essentially one siege. So if I tactically say I'm going to go for that castle there and make sure that that's my goal and we siege that out, hopefully then we'll have enough supply to outlast that siege. And also that works on a defensive standpoint, because you can go, right, if I can outlast the siege long enough, the fact that they won't be able to get supply in, they'll have to retreat. So I can see it working both ways, which, yeah, I like, because it means you have to micro your warfare a bit more than just, I'm going to take this 30,000 troops and send them to Constantinople. Let's do this crusade. Let's go. Like,
or on the flip side, the Pope just called the crusade. All I gotta do is get my 30,000 troops to Rome, assault it down, and all is fine.
Oh yeah, if you're playing like a Sudi character.
I did that a lot in one of my, I think my Hellenic Greek run. I had 6 or 7 crusades called against me. I think probably 5 of them I ended within, before it was really a tough war to fight, by just getting everybody on boats, landing them on Rome, assaulting down every holding there, 100% war score, I won.
So, on this supply factor, there's a number of things that affect it, and going back to that, but going back to our discussion about advantage, it's the same sort of things affect advantage as affect supply. So, your commander's martial ability, I believe, or commander's bonuses can affect supply. So if you've got, for example, in CK2, to use one of their traits as an example, I'm sorry if you can hear a Hoover in the background. They had the organizer trait, which meant you could move faster. I'm guessing in CK3 that will mean you have better supply limit, or there was someone will have like a logistician trait, or if someone has relatively like more stewardy sort of traits, it might affect supply. Which also I can see appearing in the character trees. Like, we had the character trees in a previous Dev Diary. I can imagine that if someone's going down a stewardship pathway, there might be, in one of those trees, an effect to supply in either provinces that they're in control of or in armies that they're commanding of. I can see that being a tie-in, like, but when these, because they've got this whole idea of characters are now the main focus, which is great, and this whole, I've been describing it as the Skyrim leveling system. It's where the people go down a tree to learn their stats and get new bonuses from going down a tree, sort of thing. I can see that directly affecting both the warfare path and like how commanders are shaped, if that makes sense. So you've got commanders that are better as just combatants, and you've got commanders who are better at like I'm gonna sit here, command all the siege equipment and run the baggage train, if that's okay. Yeah, cool, thanks, bye.
Yeah, it definitely is going to make choosing your commanders more interesting for armies depending on the situation, for certain. Because before in CK2, it was kind of like what I said before. There was like two tiers of people picking commanders. There's people, oh, that's got the biggest marshal, best commander, and people who go, okay, let's check his traits. Let's see what those are. Then we'll put them on the appropriate flank. Oh, I've got inspiring leader. Put him in the center because he gets bonuses for leading in the center. In this, I could definitely see it being more situational. I've got to get from France to Jerusalem. I'm gonna need. I don't care about their fighting ability. If everybody starves to death, it's not gonna matter. I need a supply train that's going to be able to get me there. Or I'm fighting a defensive war. I've got the home field advantage. Supplies don't matter for me as much. Just stack on the combat bonuses.
Yeah, and I also, one question that this whole thing poises at me is, in a multiplayer scenario, how is it going to work with characters being involved in combat? Because not only now do characters appear as commanders, but they also appear as knights now. So if I'm playing a lowly count,
in an army,
and if I'm a knight in an army, how is that going to affect? Like if I'm in the Lord's army as a count and I'm high marshal, but I'm not in a command role, what is that going to be? Is it going to be similar to CK2, where it's just amorphous combat? I might die, I might not. Or is it gonna? Or am I gonna have something like? Is my character gonna affect the army in any other way than that? Is that? Or another thing is, like, if you've got commanders being played by people, do their decisions help the army or hinder the army in any way? Like we've been saying with the stats, is it purely stat based, or is this going to be slightly decision based? Because we've seen that they've got quite a lot of nice new sort of glitzy events. Is that going to be tied in? We don't know yet, because obviously this is all under development. But that's the first question that comes to me.
I love the idea of playing as a vassal and your liege telling you, like, calling you up, be like, okay, get all your peasants, we're going to war, and then you're just going, about that, can you say no?
Yeah,
because like in CK2, you get asked to be, your liege can ask you to be a commander, and there are prestige bonuses for that, obviously, but there's also the negatives of I don't know what battles he's going to throw me into. He could get me killed easily, and there's also the problem that, like, if you're a commander or a chancellor or something like that, your personal treasury moves with you and is not at your house, which has definitely been a problem for me before, where quality 4 items just poofed and disappeared because I was physically somewhere else because I was leading an army and my stuff was with me and not at my house.
But at the same time, if it's equipped stuff, it's going to be like with you, and you lose it in combat. But at the same time, your castle would be sieged and they'll nick another thing. You're like, I can't win.
Yeah, I definitely had that happen before. It's like, why was my finger bone of Saint John, like, in my pocket at the time? Should that not have been in a reliquary or something?
Yeah.
Why was the foreskin of Jesus personally on me in combat?
I mean, why wouldn't you be carrying that?
That only helps in the bedroom. We know that, Midge.
Oh,
you
no,
know
no.
that. I know
no.
that.
We all know that battles are a massive manifestation of male prowess. Of course, you're going to just wear that around your neck, like, come at me. No, but, like, at the moment in CK2, there is no negative to not being a commander if you're asked, or a counselor. You can just turn it down, and and your AI leash will just spam at you until you accept or don't. I kind of want to see, like, a positive negative with it.
Say no, and then your liege be like, okay, bitch, we're gonna hash this out after the war.
Yeah, or it's like, you can say no to raising your levies, but you'll really, really anger them, or be like class in open rebellion or something for that, or like you like for not being a commander, it's a prestige hit because everyone sees you as a coward, or you like which is, I'd like to see a bit more interplay with that, which we're not saying that this isn't going to happen.
There's
this
potential
is just,
for it right there.
Yeah, there's potential for it. This is setting up for a lot more potential for it. Now, one thing we haven't actually spoken about yet, again, is the men-at-arms sort of section. So men-at-arms is the mid-tier sort of military. This is where retinues are in CK2. This is your trained, paid-for troops that are on top of this peasant levy that will directly affect your tactical advantage in some way against their retinue, or was it now men-at-arms? So if I had a pike men-at-arms, like in CK2.
That's going to take getting used to saying men-at-arms to encompass everything instead of just my total war brain going, men-at-arms, they're guy with swords and shields.
Yeah, or my old Warhammer Bretonia days, which men-at-arms is your pikeman or your sword and shieldman. Now, men-at-arms is now the term for like your hired specialist units, your retinue, your thing. So if you've got pikemen, they're better against cavalry. But if you've got a load of pikemen and they've got a lot of bowmen, you might struggle, and it's going to be this sort of tug-of-war scenario, which is very, very similar to CK2, and I don't think that needs explaining too much, but there is one element of it I think does need highlighting, which is the siege equipment.
Siege equipment is actually a thing that exists, which I absolutely love the fact that siege equipment is things that actually exist and move with your army, for the sole reason that there are siege engines historically that were so impressive they have names, and I want that in the game. I want a trebuchet so big that somebody names it.
You want to Longshanks this, and you want to go to a Scottish castle. They're going to surrender at the sight of your trebuchet, but you want to fire it, so you just fire it
out
anyway.
of spite.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or there were a lot of early like bombards and siege guns and things like that were given names that still exist today in museums and things like that. I love that idea. There was one picture in here that showed us like a tiny little onager, a catapult, a trebuchet, and then like a primitive siege gun.
Yeah, there's a great image of just like the lineup there. It's just like this is like medieval warfare at its finest. Have a load of siege equipment, and
I can imagine those being very expensive or time consuming to build. I could definitely see it being a situation where you might what I'm thinking of is maybe a situation like an intrigue option, like Search for a Smith in CK2, where you have to find a siege engineer, hire them, and then go through like a small event chain, kind of like when you're building your armor or your weapons or something like that, to see what kind of quality item that is actually built. I would like to see stuff like that.
Siege engineer commanders as well. Someone who's specifically, you bring someone who's learned or an architect, someone who has got like a high learning instead of a high marshal comes in as a commander of the army, but they're specifically giving bonuses to the siege equipment. Great, I'd love that. That's gonna be great. And I do like the whole men-at-arms thing. It doesn't sound as permanent as retinues in CK2. I get the impression that it's more like you raise these for a war and then you let them go afterwards. Again,
there was some mention of that in the Dev Diary, like raise anything up to fight a specific army. Yeah, I didn't get that feeling. I felt like they were just saying that it was like you can do this, but most people who raise up retinues either raise up all of your cultural retinue or just make a homogenous army. Like freestanding army. I get the feeling it's going to be similar to that, but it's not really specified so much in this DD. One thing they did mention, though, that their cultural retinues are still a thing, but also regional retinues are a thing, based on the area.
Welsh longbows are going to appear, which is going to be fun on a bun.
I like that idea, too, because instead of tying all retinues, I imagine that there might be two unique types available to you, cultural and regional ones, which I think is a good idea.
And I can see there being some crossover where cultural ones are also regional ones. So, like, for example, Britain, I can see there being a lot of, like, culturally, I can see there being, like, a sort of, like, a men-at-arms-y kind of thing, and then a regionally being a slightly different men-at-arms, like, different sort of structure, maybe.
Longbow and longer bowmen.
Well, longbows were historically Welsh, and Britain took them all from the Welsh.
You can't let the Welsh have weapons.
Well, no. It was like, oh, you guys are really, really good at this. Do you want to come with us? We're going to France. We've got a little place called Agincourt we're going to go to, and we're going to wait for it to rain. Yeah. Gee, speaking of, there's a Netflix film. This is really off topic, but there's a Netflix film at the moment, The King, which is about Henry V, and it's like one of the first it's fictional history in the fact that it uses characters from Shakespeare, but it is a very sort of accurate medieval battle portrayal of Agincourt. It's like, it's really good. Like, they get the armor and swords and everything really right, and it's definitely worth a watch if you got a time. So,
speaking of Agincourt, that reminds me of something that I saw in this Dev Diary here. So when you're playing in CK2, you got a big you got a big war. You win a stunning victory, 55% war score. They specifically mentioned that battles are worth far less war score than sieges in CK3 as opposed to CK2.
Mm-hmm.
They very specifically mentioned that, which I like that idea because I always thought it would be it was a little crazy that, like, an example from my current CK2 game, playing as Zoroastrians on the Caspian Sea. I broke free. The Abbasids turned around and attacked me. They had 30,000 troops. They brought over an army of 12,000 troops. I beat them in a stunning victory, 45% war score. It's like, I killed half of one army, which was less than half of their total army. 45% war score seems like a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like, I don't know if they're going to balance that out by making sieges worth more or just make wars harder to win by just reducing that alone. But it definitely seems like CK3 battles are going to be less decisive than they were before.
But in the same vein, although they don't commit to war score very much, there's now this whole post-battle phase, which
post-battle pursuit is more important. Yes.
Yeah, like there's and it specifically targets your retinues again. So your retinues are the people that sort of battle in this post-battle phase at the same, like, so for example, if you've got cavalry, they're going to be very good at pursuing. So there's I think did it say a 6-day period? I can't remember, post-battle.
I don't think it mentioned an exact amount of days. It just said several, I think.
But anyway, so there's a phase where basically one army is running and the other is
It's the route phase of It's the end of any battle in a CK2 battle.
Yeah.
I think it's more defined though.
Yeah, it's more defined, and like your men-at-arms have special roles in that moment. So like for example, pursuit cavalry will be hunting down enemy troops to weaken their numbers post-battle. But there's also screening units which will do the opposite. They'll have delaying actions and they'll protect fleeing soldiers to reduce how many losses you take post-battle. Because historically in medieval combat, not many people actually died in a battle. It was always the sort of aftermath era where you'd hunt people down and kill them. The actual struggles in the field, it was probably about equal in terms of phases of battle, in terms of losses. Like people broke a lot quicker than people died, if that makes sense.
There are historical examples in some of the Roman civil wars of battles lasting, in a lot of medieval battles, troops would hit each other, whack a little bit, and then one side would rout and flee, or it would last for a little while and they would actually hack it out, but it would be over relatively quickly. There are actual historical battles in Roman period of time where the battles literally lasted through a day, through the night, into the next day, into the next night, into the next day, because they were so evenly matched. People were just hacking and slashing that literally entire time for days on end. And then, like Midge was saying, then the rout would happen and that's where most of the casualties would take place, in the rout.
Yeah, because as well in the medieval period, it got to a point where everyone was so heavily armored that you couldn't kill people because they were walking tanks.
Agincourt, didn't the English send the longbowmen just to dagger the French armored soldiers?
Going back to the film, the way they did it actually perfectly shows what they did. It's like the British sent a unit of knights dismounted into the mud, full armor, to gear the French cavalry on, because the French decided to keep everyone mounted. They charged, got all of the French cavalry in a melee, all the while being hit by longbowmen from a distance, and then the rest of the army were all sort of disarmored and light and fast moving. Literally went in with short swords, daggers, really things, and just grabbed an armored knight who couldn't maneuver around enough and found a little
you've got a weak point over here.
You've got an eye socket, hello. And it's just used it against it. But the whole time where the two heavily armored like combatants are next to each other. It's a rugby scrum. No one's doing it. Everyone's just trying to hit each other on the head, but not anything to do it because like everyone is just fully armored. There's like no one can sort of maneuver to kill one another, and so it makes sense that a lot more of this damage is happening in the route phase, I think, is what we're trying to get up and stuff like that.
Actually, reminds me of a YouTube video I watched a little while ago. I can't remember the name of the channel. I'd have to go look at the history, but it was a guy who does like just medieval stuff. Like he makes medieval longbows and crossbows and armor and stuff like that, and he makes videos about testing them. And there was one video I watched recently where he took a like a light steel breastplate and he put it on a stand, and then he got one of his friends who's a trained longbowman with like a 200-pound draw and just had him shoot the thing. And the longbow arrows at a decent range wouldn't penetrate it. Every single arrow would just shatter, but then there'd be this huge spray of wooden shrapnel just going straight up into the face.
You know, we were talking about this whole idea of forcing people to be commanders or not. I've just seen one of the screenshots. That's actually a thing.
Oh wait, is it? I remember. I know the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
Duke Dado of Lausitz.
The buttons say
Your
force,
Spymaster
allow,
Castle.
and forbid. So you can force him to be, because that's around the commander section. You can force him.
I saw that before, and I was wondering if that was what that was.
It's not mentioned in the text, but it's in the screenshot. So
it's contextual.
Yeah, it's
like this is what's happening. Here's a screenshot.
Yeah, which is like, ooh, is that what's going to be a thing? Is it going to have negative and positive modifiers? It's going to be great. But yeah, so what? Let's sum up, shall we? We're probably at a point where we're ready to sum up.
Yeah.
We've talked about everything. If like I say this in all my videos, if you want to read it for yourself, I'll put a link in the description to the Dev Diary so you can read it in more detail. But I think we've given the gist. I'm excited to see where this goes. Very much.
I really like what I've seen this, because Midge, when he came back from PDXCon, was all giddy about CK3, and I am an ornery. I'm 10 years older than Midge, and I'm an ornery old bastard. So all this information, I was like, I was around for Hearts of Iron 4, I was around for Stellaris, I was around for Imperator, I was around a lot for Imperator. I was there for months before it released, playing that game, going, oh no. and so I'm cautious. I'm more cautious. Whenever anybody asks me, I always boil it down to one sentence. I'm cautiously optimistic about it. What I'm seeing, like, I know they were going to be changing things for Warfare. I knew they were going to be doing that, but it looks like this is for the better, because that's something that always lacked in CK2, was the Warfare stuff was a little, while the information was there, most people just ignored it, and it was a little hard to feel like you were really having that much an effect with your actions outside of just having a bigger number and putting in a better commander. But this definitely seems like you'll be able to kind of tailor your combat to your style and your scenario, which I like.
Yeah, there's going to be more of what feels like a warfare book, if that makes sense, like a rule book. Like, if you've got a larger army, you want to face them on the plains, and if you're a smaller army, you don't want to face them on the plains if you can help it. So there's going to be a lot of maneuvering and planning, and you know, there's
one thing I worry about, though. There's one thing I worry about is the meta. Because the more granularity you put in there, and the more options you give to your player, the more finite that balancing act has to be to make sure that there is a good balance of power. And if you look at like Hearts of Iron 4 and Imperator and things like that, and definitely Stellaris, because for a while the meta in Stellaris was just spam Corvettes because everything else was a waste of money. The meta worries me. That's the only thing that worries me, is if you don't get it balanced right, then really within a few days or a few weeks, somebody will find the meta, they'll put it up on Reddit, and everybody will follow suit, and all of a sudden there'll be the right way to play the game, which I really always hated, because I'm a very RPG kind of guy, and I don't play meta, and I will purposely go out of my way to not meta. And then usually what ends up happening is there's the meta. The PDX reads it. Somebody at PDX reads about it. They change it in the next patch. Then they find the next meta, change it. Then the next meta, they change it. Then the next meta.
The thing is, with CK2, the combat is or CK2 or the Crusader Kings more franchise, because it's character focused and not nation building focus. It's dynastically focused and not. You don't have to paint the map. Is the thing with Crusader Kings. So even
Boy,
if
do
there
people
is,
get mad if you decide not to paint the map, though.
oh, yeah, they really do. But like from our perspective, at least, I won't be disappointed if there does become a meta, because we can just choose to not do it. Like there's so much. There's gonna be so much. Unlike Imperator, which is a Roman warfare simulator. If
you opt out of the meta, you're just gonna lose.
Yeah, exactly. Or Hearts of Iron.
Hearts of Iron 4. If you haven't read the latest Reddit post on what the meta is, you don't have the perfect army comp. You're just gonna get wiped.
Those two games are more of a warfare game, whereas this is more of a dynastic sim. So even if there is a meta, I don't feel like it's gonna, for us at least, affect it too much. If you're playing a multiplayer, maybe. Like, if you are competitively multiplayer in CK2, because I know some people play the games like that. They do
competitive multiplayer CK2. That just doesn't sound right.
I mean, like, you know what I mean? People get together and they want to fight it out. They want to duke it out in combat and sort of thing. A meta might affect that. And with all games, there's always going to be a chance of being a meta. But I think this currently has the best sort of chance of there not being one. But at the same time, it's a game. There's always going to be a meta in some way.
We're not going to know until we get our hands on it. We can actually start fighting. You don't know if maybe the archers are going to be, you know, the most powerful thing, and losing battles doesn't matter if you could just stack enough screens.
Yeah.
Because you just won't lose any troops.
I'll be interested.
You know, we don't know. We're going to have to figure it out.
Yeah, no, I'll be interested to know if there's actually limitations on what each nation can field because of like regional and kingdom like special retinues. Like, is it going to be a tactical advantage for the British once they have the Welsh under their control against the French, like historically there was, because of the longbow? Because nowhere else in Europe really used longbows at all. They all had crossbowmen. Is there going to be that advantage? Is it going to be unbalanced? Is there going to be a balancing between nations that needs to happen, or is it going to be more granular? That's where I can see the meta being the problem, if that makes sense. Because that's kind of what we have as a problem in CK2.
Just not enough information here right now to make
a
assessment.
Exactly. With CK2's meta at the moment is cavalry. Cavalry. If you're Italian, pikemen. Just all pikemen.
It's either cavalry or pikemen, or camels. Camels. When I was doing my Ethiopian Jewish run, the very first thing I did was I was like, oh, Ethiopian retinue is light, a shit ton of light infantry. Oh, I could switch to my liege's Bedouin culture and get camel warriors in here. Yeah, let's get those in. Or my Greek Hellenic run. By about I would say 40% into the game, I had a retinue of a few thousand heavy cav. I didn't even need to raise up my levies most of the time because a few thousand heavy cav would just storm over everything.
Yeah, I'm doing one of those at the moment, but Byzantium turned Catholic, so I've got Catholic cataphracts. So I've got more heavy cavalry.
Catholicafrax. There you go.
Catholicafrax, yeah. So I've got more heavy cavalry than any other Christian nation could put out because it's a huge retinue. So it's just like, well, Crusades are mine then. I just storm in with loads of light and heavy cavalry, just like, yep. What do you need? So it's going to be that. That's where I can see the issue's going to appear. That's where I think the meta's going to be. Like, it's going to be in balancing the men-at-arms. That's...
Overall, I'm happy with it.
But yeah, I'm very happy with what I've seen. There's less in this Dev Diary that I'm unhappy with than previous ones. Previous ones I've gone, it's in certain points. I've always been predominantly happy, but this one I'm the most happy with, I think.
Yeah, I'll agree. The first two, I was kind of like 60-40. This one, I'm more like 90-10. I'm pretty happy with this.
Yeah, for sure.
But I think we've covered everything in there.
I think so. So, do you want to close us off?
Sure. Well, thank you for watching / listening to us ramble, guys, because I know a lot of people on my side use this as kind of a podcast format to catch up on the CK3 Dev Diaries. We'll be back probably next week or whenever they hit with, because these have been a little sporadic so far in when they've been coming out, but I'm sure that'll kind of even out as time goes on.
Who's writing the Dev Diary?
I haven't the foggiest idea.
Because they haven't. It's all written in first person. They've all been the same person, but it's not actually listed who's writing them.
I haven't the foggiest idea who's holding this up. But I will say this: they have a greater grasp of the English language than the people doing the Imperator ones was. There's a lot of times when I was doing the Imperator ones when I read a sentence and then just stare at it for a second, going.
So you're saying they're probably Swedish?
But probably, yeah. But anyway, thanks for watching and listening, everyone. Me and Midge will be back with Dev Diary number 4 in a little while, and we will see you next time.
Yeah, and if you would like us to cover anything else specifically that might have already been said, or if you want us to bring in any other guests to talk about this stuff with, do let us know in the comments down below. We would really... this is kind of like a test sort of for this idea, and if it grows into something else, we're all for it. So yeah, give us your suggestions down below, and we will see you next time.
Bye-bye.